Jake Morrison was fixing a broken air filter when the ship started shaking like a broken washing machine. He dropped his tools and grabbed the nearest wall as the lights flickered and died. Emergency power kicked in a few seconds later, painting everything in red light. The ship's alarm was screaming so loud he could barely think. Jake had been working on starships for 8 years, and he knew that sound meant they were in serious trouble. He ran down the corridor toward the engine room, passing other crew members, who looked just as confused as he felt. Captain Lisa Rodriguez's voice came over the speakers, telling everyone to get to emergency stations. Jake reached the engine room and saw exactly what he feared most. The main drive core was dark, and sparks were shooting from 3 different control panels. Chief Engineer Pete Brady was already there, his face pale as he stared at the damage. "How bad is it?" Jake asked, though he could already guess the answer from Pete's expression. "We're dead in space," Pete said, shaking his head. "The core is completely fried, and we lost 2 backup systems. We've got maybe 6 hours of life support left, and that's if we're lucky." Jake looked at the readings on his handheld scanner and felt his stomach drop. They were in the middle of nowhere, light years from the nearest Earth colony. The Horizon Dawn was an exploration ship, not a military vessel, so they didn't have the heavy-duty repair equipment needed to fix something this big. They had been on a routine mission to make first contact with a new alien species in the Kepler 442 system. When everything went wrong, the ship shuddered again, and Jake realized they were being pulled towards something. He checked the navigation display and saw a large planet directly ahead. It was the only world in this system that could support life, which meant they might survive the crash landing if they were very lucky. Captain Rodriguez came over the speakers again. "All hands, prepare for emergency landing. This is not a drill. We're going down on the planet below, and I need everyone in crash positions in 5 minutes." Jake spent those 5 minutes making sure the life support systems would keep working. During the landing, he had grown up on Titan, one of Saturn's moons, where his father worked in the mining colonies. Life there was hard, and Jake had learned early that when things broke, you fixed them yourself or you died. That experience had made him good at keeping things running when they should have stopped working long ago. The landing was rough but not deadly. The ship carved a long groove in what looked like red dirt before finally stopping. Jake's head was ringing and his shoulder hurt, but he was alive. He helped get the other crew members out of their crash harnesses and did a quick count. All 23 people had survived, which was more than he had expected. They stepped outside and found themselves on a world that looked like Mars, but with a breathable atmosphere. The sky was orange, and 2 small moons hung overhead. In the distance, Jake could see mountains and what might have been a city. Before anyone could say much about their situation, they heard a sound that made everyone freeze. Thought it was the sound of engines, but not human engines. 3 large ships appeared over the horizon, moving fast and heading straight for them. The ships were like nothing Jake had ever seen before. They were long and curved, covered in what looked like green metal scales, and they moved through the air without making any noise until they were almost overhead. The alien ships landed about 100 meters away, and Jake watched as the crews came out. They were tall, maybe 8 feet, with 4 arms and skin that looked like it was made of green crystals. They moved with purpose, like soldiers, and Jake noticed they all carried weapons of some kind. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward with her hands raised in the universal peace gesture. One of the aliens, bigger than the others, and wearing what looked like armor made of gold metal, approached her. It spoke in a language that sounded like rocks grinding together, but then a small device on its belt started talking in perfect English. "I am War Chief Kithara of the Zephyrian Empire," the translation device said. "You have crashed on Valdor's Prime, a world under our protection. By ancient law, you are now our prisoners. You have two choices. You can become slaves and work in our mines until you die, or one of you can fight 3 of our champions in the Grand Arena. If your champion wins all 3 fights, you go free. If your champion loses even 1 fight, you all become slaves forever. The captain started to argue, trying to explain that they were explorers, not invaders, but the alien just held up one of its 4 hands to stop her. These are our laws. It said, choose now. Jake looked around at his crewmates. Most of them were scientists and technicians, not fighters. Captain Rodriguez was trained in diplomacy, not combat. Dr. Amy Chun knew everything about alien biology, but had never thrown a punch in her life. None of them were soldiers. That was when Jake stepped forward. He was just a guy who fixed broken things for a living, but he had grown up in a place where you learned to fight or you didn't survive. I'll do it, he said, his voice steady even, though his heart was racing. Everyone stared at him like he had lost his mind. War Chief Kithara looked him up and down and made a sound that the translator turned into laughter. This small one thinks he can defeat our champions, it said. Very. Well, the fights begin tomorrow. Rest tonight, little human. You will need your strength for the short time you have left to live. Jake spent that night in a small room that the Zephyrians gave him to prepare for the fights. The walls were made of the same green crystal material as their skin, and the only furniture was a simple bed and a table. He couldn't sleep much, so he spent most of the time thinking about what he was going to do. The aliens had told him he could choose his weapons from their arena vault, and he would get to see it in the morning before the first fight. Dr. Amy Chun came to visit him just after sunrise. She had been up all night studying the Zephyrian guards and learning everything she could about their biology. She sat down across from Jake and pulled out her tablet, which was full of notes and diagrams. I've been watching them, she said, keeping her voice low in case someone was listening. They're bigger and stronger than us, obviously, and having 4 arms gives them a huge advantage in close combat. But I found some things that might help you. Jake leaned forward to look at her notes. Amy had always been the smartest person on the ship, and if anyone could find a weakness in these aliens, it would be her. Their nervous system is slower than ours, she explained, pointing to a diagram she had drawn. They can hit harder, but they react about half a second slower than a human would. That doesn't sound like much, but in a fight, it could make a big difference. She flipped to another page that showed the crystalline scales covering the alien's body. These scales are incredibly tough, but they have blind spots. The way they're arranged means they can't see attacks coming from certain angles, especially from below and to their left side. Jake studied the information, trying to figure out how he could use it. He wasn't a soldier or a martial artist. He was an engineer who had learned to fight in the mining colonies because that's what you did to survive. His fighting style wasn't pretty or technical. It was about using whatever was available and ending fights as quickly as possible. There's something else, Amy said, lowering her voice even more. Their metabolisms burn energy much faster than ours. They're built for short, intense fights, not long battles. If you can make the fight last long enough, they might get tired before you do. A guard came to get Jake an hour later. The alien led him through corridors, lined with more crystal walls until they reached a large room filled with weapons. Jake had expected to see advanced laser guns and molecular swords, but most of the weapons looked surprisingly primitive. There were clubs, spears, and various bladed weapons made from the same green crystal material as everything else. Jake walked around the room, picking up different weapons and testing their weight. The Zephyrian guard watched him with what might have been amusement. Nothing felt right in his hands. These weapons were made for aliens with 4 arms and different fighting styles. Then he saw something in the corner that made him stop. It wasn't a weapon at all. It was a plasma cutter, the same type of tool he used every day to repair starships. Next to it was an industrial hammer and a coil of magnetic grappling cable. They looked old and worn, probably taken from some other crashed ship. "Can I use these?" Jake asked, pointing to the tools. The guard made that grinding rock sound that passed for laughter among the Zephyrians. "If the small human wants to fight with repair tools, he may do so," the translator said. "It will make his defeat more amusing." Jake picked up the plasma cutter and checked its power cell. It was nearly full, which meant it could cut through starship hull material for about 20 minutes before needing a recharge. The hammer was heavier than he was used to, but it had a good balance and a magnetic field generator that could be useful. The grappling cable was the same type he had used for years to secure equipment in zero-gravity. The guard led him to the arena, and Jake got his first look at where he would be fighting. It was a massive circular pit surrounded by rising rows of seats that were already filling up with Zephyrian spectators. The floor was covered in the same red dirt they had crashed on, and there were no obstacles or cover anywhere. War Chief Kithara stood up in what was obviously the place of honor. "Humans of the ship Horizon Dawn," his translator announced, "witness the first test of your champion. He will face Gorvek the Bone Crusher, who has never been defeated in single combat." The gate on the opposite side of the arena opened, and Jake saw his opponent for the first time. Gorvek was huge, even by Zephyrian standards. He had to be at least 9 feet tall, and his crystal scales were darker than the others, almost black. He carried a massive club that was embedded with energy crystals that glowed with blue light. The crowd was making a lot of noise, cheering for their champion, and probably making bets on how quickly Jake would die. Jake walked to the center of the arena, trying to look more confident than he felt. Gorvik followed, and when they were about 10 feet apart, the war chief gave the signal to begin. Gorvak charged immediately, swinging his massive club in an overhead strike that would have turned Jake into paste if it had connected. But Jake had been paying attention to Amy's notes about reaction time. He rolled to the side just as the club came down, and the weapon hit the arena floor so hard it cracked the stone. Underneath, Jake came up with the plasma cutter already firing. The blue-white beam sliced through the air where Gorvak's leg would have been if the alien hadn't jumped back. The crowd went quiet for a moment, probably surprised that the human had actually managed to avoid the first attack. Gorvik was more careful after that, circling Jake and looking for an opening. Jake kept moving, using his smaller size to stay mobile while he figured out his strategy. The arena floor was solid stone, but he remembered what the plasma cutter could do to starship hulls. If it could cut through reinforced metal, it could definitely weaken stone. He started cutting lines in the floor as he moved, making them look random, so Gorvik wouldn't realize what he was doing. The alien probably thought Jake was just panicking and firing wildly. After a few minutes, Jake had created a network of weakened areas all around where they were fighting. When Gorvak charged again, Jake was ready. He used the magnetic cable to snag one of the alien's feet, then activated the plasma cutter at full power and sliced through the stone directly under Gorvak's path. The massive alien's weight did the rest. The weakened floor collapsed, and Gorvak crashed into the pit Jake had created. The alien was stunned, but not seriously hurt. Jake jumped down after him and used the industrial hammer to finish the fight. The hammer's magnetic field disrupted the energy crystals in Gorvak's club, and without his weapon, the alien couldn't defend himself effectively. When Gorvak finally yielded, the entire arena was silent. Jake climbed out of the pit and looked up at War Chief Kithara, who was staring at him with what might have been respect. "The human wins the first battle," the translator announced. "2 fights remain." Word about Jake's victory spread through the Zephyrian city faster than he had expected. When the guards brought him back to his room, he could hear the aliens in the corridors talking in their grinding voices. The translator device, one of them, Carried picked up pieces of their conversation, and Jake learned that no one had expected the small human to survive even 5 minutes against. GORVAK. Dr. Amy Chun was waiting for him when he got back. She looked relieved to see him alive, but also excited about something. "I watched the whole fight from the viewing area they put us in," she said. "The way you used the environment and your tools instead of trying to overpower him was brilliant. But I've been listening to the guards talking, and they're bringing in someone special for the second fight." She pulled out her tablet again as time showing sketches she had made of different Sisyphean warriors. "Her name is Silthra the Shadow Dancer. She's smaller than Gorvak, but much faster, and she uses 2 energy whips that can cut through almost anything. The guards say she's never lost a fight either, and she's been studying recordings of your battle all night." Jake sat down on the simple bed and thought about what that meant. Gorvak had been strong but not very smart, and he had relied on brute force to win his fights. If this Silthra was actually studying his tactics, the second fight was going to be much harder. "There's more," Amy continued. "The second fight won't be in the main arena. They're using something called the Shadow Maze, which is a multi-level fighting area with lots of hiding spots and obstacles. It's designed for warriors who prefer speed and stealth over raw power." Jake spent the rest of the day thinking about how to handle a fast opponent in an environment designed to give her every advantage. The tools that had worked against Gorvak might not be as effective against someone who could attack from multiple directions and disappear before he could respond. The next morning, the guards took him to a different weapon room. This one had more advanced equipment, including some items that looked like they might be useful in a 3-dimensional fighting space. Jake picked up the same plasma cutter and magnetic cable he had used before, but this time he also chose a small shield generator and what looked like a grappling hook designed for climbing. The Shadow Maze was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. It was a massive cube about 50 feet on each side, filled with platforms, ramps, tunnels, and hiding spots on multiple levels. The whole thing was dimly lit with blue light that created deep shadows everywhere. Jake could see why they called it a maze. Silthra was already inside when Jake entered. She was smaller than Gorvak, maybe 7 feet tall, and her crystal scales had a silver color that seemed to shift and change in the dim light. Her 2 energy whips crackled with electricity, and she moved with a fluid grace that reminded Jake of a cat stalking its prey. War Chief Fithira's voice echoed through the maze from speakers hidden in the walls. "Let the second battle begin," the translator announced. Silthra vanished immediately, disappearing into the shadows like she had never been there at all. Jake activated his shield generator and started moving toward the center of the maze, trying to keep track of all the possible directions an attack could come from. The first strike came from above, one of the energy whips crackling down toward his head. Jake rolled aside and fired the plasma cutter upward, but Silthra was already gone. For the next hour, it was like fighting a ghost. Silthra would appear, just long enough to launch an attack, then vanish before Jake could respond. The energy whips left glowing trails in the air, and Jake's shield generator was starting to overheat from blocking so many strikes. He realized that Amy had been right about Zephyrian metabolism, but Silthra seemed to have found a way around that weakness by making every attack count and then resting between strikes. Jake stopped trying to chase her and started thinking like an engineer instead of a warrior. The maze had a power source that provided the lighting and probably other systems as well. If he could find the main power conduits, he might be able to change the rules of the fight. He used the plasma cutter to slice through what looked like a decorative panel, and found exactly what he was looking for. Behind the panel was a network of power cables that fed energy to different parts of the maze. Jake started cutting specific cables, and sections of the lighting began to fail. Silthra realized what he was doing and attacked more aggressively, trying to stop him before he could plunge the entire maze into darkness. But Jake had spent years working on Starship electrical systems, and he knew exactly which cables to cut to create the effect he wanted. When the lights finally went out, the maze was pitch black, except for the glow from Silthra's energy whips. That was exactly what Jake had been hoping for. The whips that had been her greatest weapon were now beacons that showed him exactly where she was at all times. Jake had grown up in the mining tunnels of Titan, where power failures were common, and working in total darkness was just part of the job. He moved through the maze by feel and memory, using the magnetic cable to swing between levels while Silthra tried to find him. Every time her whips lit up the darkness, Jake could see her position and plan his next move. The end came when Silthra made a mistake. She fired both whips at once, trying to cover more area, but that left her exposed for just a few seconds. Jake used that moment to swing down from above on the magnetic cable and land directly behind her. The industrial hammer's magnetic field disrupted her weapon systems, and without her whips, she couldn't fight effectively in the close quarters. When emergency lighting came on a few minutes later, Silthra was unconscious, and Jake was sitting next to her, checking to make sure she was still breathing. The crowd of Zephyrians watching from outside the maze was completely silent. War Chief Kithara's voice came over the speakers again, but this time there was something different in his tone. "The human wins the second battle," the translator said. "One fight remains." Jake looked up at the viewing area where his crew was being held. Captain Rodriguez was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read, and Dr. Chun was frantically taking notes on her tablet. Pete Brady gave him a thumbs up, and Jake realized that for the first time since the crash, his people actually believed they might get out of this alive. But he also knew that the third fight would be the hardest one yet. The Zephyrians wouldn't underestimate him again, and whoever they chose as their final champion would be ready for everything Jake had shown them so far. As the guards led him back to his room, Jake heard the aliens talking among themselves again. This time, the translator picked up more of their conversation, and what he heard made him worry about what was coming next. They were talking about bringing in War Chief Kithara himself for the final battle. Jake didn't sleep at all the night before the final battle. He sat in his room, going over everything he had learned about Zephyrian fighting tactics and trying to prepare for what was coming. Dr. Amy Chun had confirmed his worst fears during her evening visit. War Chief Kithara himself would be his opponent in the third fight, and according to the guards, Kithara had never lost a battle in over 30 years of warfare. "He's not just their strongest warrior," Amy explained, her voice quiet and worried. "He's also their smartest military leader. The guards told me he spent all day studying recordings of your first two fights. He knows about the plasma cutter, the magnetic cable, and how you use the environment against your opponents. Whatever you're planning to do, he'll be ready for it." Jake stared at the ceiling and thought about his situation. He had won the first two fights by being unpredictable and using his engineering knowledge to turn the arenas into weapons. But Kithara would have countermeasures for everything Jake had already shown. The war chief would probably bring backup, weapons, adaptive armor, and tactics specifically designed to stop a human engineer who fought like a guerrilla warrior. The morning came too soon. When the guards arrived to take him to the weapon room, Jake noticed they were different from the ones who had escorted him before. These aliens wore better armor and carried more advanced weapons. They were obviously elite soldiers, probably Kithara's personal guard. The weapon room had been completely restocked with new equipment. Jake realized that Kithara had removed anything that might give him an advantage and replaced it with weapons designed to counter his previous tactics. The plasma cutter was still there, but it had been modified somehow. When Jake picked it up, he saw that someone had installed a power limiter that would prevent him from using it at full strength. The magnetic cable was shorter than the one he had used before, and the industrial hammer had been replaced with a lighter version that wouldn't generate as strong a magnetic field. Jake understood the message. Kithara was telling him that he knew exactly how Jake fought and had prepared accordingly. Jake spent a long time looking at the available weapons before he made his choices. In addition to the modified tools, he selected a small emergency beacon, a maintenance scanner, and what looked like a simple metal rod. The guard seemed confused by his selections, especially the rod, which didn't appear to be a weapon at all. The final arena was the largest and most complex one yet. It was a massive dome filled with variable gravity fields, energy barriers, and automated defense systems. Jake could see control panels and power distribution nodes scattered throughout the space, along with floating platforms that moved according to some programmed pattern. The whole thing looked like a three-dimensional puzzle designed by a mad scientist. War Chief Kithara was waiting for him in the center of the arena. The alien leader looked exactly like what Jake had expected from someone who had never lost a fight. His crystal scales were a deep gold color, and his armor was covered with the scars of countless battles. He carried 4 different weapons, one in each hand, and Jake could see backup equipment attached to his belt. "Small human," Kithara said, his voice coming through speakers in his armor instead of a translation device. "You have proven yourself to be more resourceful than we expected. But cleverness alone will not save you in this final test. I have studied your methods, and I am prepared for everything you might attempt." Jake looked around the arena and realized that Kithara was probably right. The war chief had designed this battlefield specifically to counter everything Jake had done in the previous fights. The variable gravity would make his mobility advantage useless. The energy barriers would block his plasma cutter, and the automated defenses would prevent him from using the environment as a weapon. War Chief Kithara gave the signal to begin, and immediately Jake understood just how outmatched he was. The alien leader moved with incredible speed and precision, using all 4 weapons in a coordinated attack pattern that should have been impossible. Jake barely managed to activate his shield generator in time to block the first assault. The fight became a running battle through the 3-dimensional maze of the arena. Kithara had obviously spent years learning how to fight in this environment, using the gravity fields and moving platforms like they were extensions of his own body. Every time Jake tried to gain an advantage, the war chief was already 3 steps ahead. Jake's modified tools were almost useless. The plasma cutter couldn't penetrate Kithara's adaptive armor. The shortened magnetic cable couldn't reach the distances he needed, and the weakened hammer bounced off the alien's shields like it was made of foam. After 20 minutes of fighting, Jake was exhausted and running out of options. That was when he stopped thinking like a warrior and started thinking like an engineer who had to fix something that was completely broken. The arena wasn't just a battlefield. It was a machine, a complex system with power sources, control circuits, and safety protocols. And like any machine, it probably had a manual override somewhere. Jake started using his maintenance scanner too. Mapped the arena's control systems while he dodged Kithara's attacks. The scanner was designed to locate power conduits and control circuits in damaged starships, and it worked just as well on Zephyrian technology. What he found surprised him. The arena's systems were incredibly complex, but they all fed back to a single master control node hidden beneath the main platform. The problem was getting to that control node, while Kithara was trying to kill him. Jake needed a distraction, something that would occupy the war chief's attention long enough for him to reach the arena's brain. That was when he remembered the emergency beacon he had selected from the weapon room. Jake activated the beacon and threw it as far as he could toward one of the automated defense systems. The beacon was designed to send out a distress signal that would override other communications in an emergency. When it hit the defense system, it created exactly the kind of electrical feedback loop Jake had been hoping for. The arena's automated systems went crazy. Gravity fields started fluctuating wildly. Energy barriers began appearing and disappearing at random, and the moving platforms started spinning out of control. Kithara, who had been relying on his knowledge of the arena's normal patterns, suddenly found himself fighting in complete chaos. Jake used that chaos to reach the master control node. The metal rod he had selected wasn't a weapon at all. It was a universal bypass tool, the kind of thing maintenance engineers use to override safety systems in emergencies. Jake jammed it into the control node and started manually overriding the arena's programming. Within seconds, every system in the arena was running in reverse. Gravity fields that should have been pulling down were pushing up. Energy barriers were forming around Kithara instead of protecting him, and the automated defenses were targeting the war chief instead of ignoring him. Kithara realized what Jake had done and tried to reach the control node to stop him, but it was too late. The arena had become Jake's weapon, and the war chief was trapped in the middle of a technological storm that he couldn't predict or control. The battle ended when Jake used the arena's own gravity systems to pin Kithara against the ceiling. The alien warrior struggled for a few moments, then let his weapons fall to the ground in surrender. "I yield," Kithara said, his voice filled with something that might have been respect. "You fight like no warrior I have ever faced, human engineer. You do not defeat your enemies. You solve them." Jake shut down the arena's systems and helped Kithara back to the ground. The war chief looked at him with what Jake was beginning to recognize as the Zephyrian equivalent of a smile. "You have won your freedom, small human," Kithara said. "But I believe our conversation is far from over." Jake expected War Chief Kithara to simply honor their agreement and let the humans leave Valdus Prime with their freedom. He was already thinking about how they could signal for a rescue ship and get back to Earth when Kithara asked him to stay for what the alien called a conversation of importance. The rest of the crew was taken to comfortable quarters while Jake was escorted to a large room that seemed to be Kithara's private office. The room was filled with star charts, tactical displays, and what looked like trophies from battles across multiple star systems. Kithara dismissed his guards and poured 2 cups of something that smelled like cinnamon from a metal pitcher. He offered one to Jake, who accepted it carefully. "In 30 years of warfare, no opponent has ever defeated me in single combat," Kithara said, settling into a chair that was obviously designed for someone with 4 arms. "You are the first, and the way you accomplished it has caused much discussion among our ruling council." Jake sipped the drink, which tasted better than it smelled, and waited for Kithara to explain what he meant. The alien leader activated a holographic display that showed a detailed map of the local star systems. "Our laws are ancient and specific," Kithara continued. "Any warrior who defeats 3 champions in the Grand Arena earns the right to claim territory proportional to their demonstrated worth. Usually, this means a small estate or perhaps a single city. But your victories were so unusual, and your methods so innovative, that the Council has declared your worth to be much greater." The holographic display zoomed in on a star system that Jake recognized as Kepler 442, the same system where their ship had crashed. One of the planets in the system began blinking with a golden light. "We offer you lordship over Kepler 442c, Kithara said. "It is a world of great resources, but harsh conditions. The native life forms are dangerous, and the environment challenges even our strongest colonists. Many have tried to tame this world, but all have failed. We believe that someone who can solve problems as creatively as you might succeed where others have not." Jake stared at the display, trying to understand what was being offered to him. You want to give me an entire planet? Not give, Kithara corrected. You have earned it through combat. By our laws, it is yours by right. But there are conditions. You must establish a functioning colony within 2 years, and you must maintain peaceful relations with the Zephyrian Empire. In exchange, we will provide you with the resources needed to begin colonization and a ship to carry your people to their new home. Jake's mind was racing. Captain Rodriguez had always talked about humanity's need to expand beyond Earth's solar system, and here was an opportunity to establish a human colony in an entirely new region of space. But it would also mean taking responsibility for the lives of anyone who chose to follow him to this new world. Why are you offering this to me? Jake asked. You could have just let us go. Kithara leaned forward in his chair, and Jake could see something like excitement in the alien's large eyes. Because you think differently than any being we have encountered. You do not simply fight your opponents. You study them, understand them, and find ways to turn their strengths into weaknesses. This kind of thinking could benefit both our species. The alien leader activated another display that showed technical diagrams and engineering schematics. We are warriors and conquerors, but we are not innovators. Our technology has remained largely unchanged for centuries because we see no need to improve what already works. But watching you fight has shown us the value of adaptation and creative problem-solving. Jake realized what Kithara was really proposing. This wasn't just about giving him a planet. It was about establishing a relationship between humans and Zephyrians that could benefit both species. You want to learn from us, and we want you to learn from us, Kithara replied. A human colony that maintains friendly relations with our empire could serve as a bridge between our peoples. Your engineering skills combined with our resources and knowledge could create something neither species could achieve alone. Jake thought about his crewmates and what this opportunity might mean for them. Dr. Amy Chun would love the chance to study alien biology in detail. Captain Rodriguez had always dreamed of commanding a colony ship. Even Pete Brady, for all his grumbling about broken equipment, was excited by the challenge of building something new from scratch. I need to talk to my people, Jake said finally. Of course, Kithara agreed, but do not take too long to decide. The Council has agreed to this arrangement, but there are others who believe humans are too dangerous to be given such freedom. Your actions in the arena have impressed some and worried others. Jake spent the next day discussing the offer with his crew. The reaction was mixed. Captain Rodriguez was cautious, worried that accepting the planet might be seen as collaboration. With an alien military power, Dr. Chun was fascinated by the scientific opportunities. Pete Brady wanted to know exactly what kind of resources the Zephyrians would provide and whether they would have access to advanced alien technology. It's a huge risk, Rodriguez said during their final discussion. We'd be completely cut off from Earth, dependent on aliens we barely understand. If something goes wrong, there's no one coming to rescue us. But it's also an incredible opportunity, Amy countered. We could be the first humans to establish a true interstellar colony. Think about what we could learn, what we could build. Jake listened to all the arguments, but he had already made his decision. He had grown up in a place where taking risks was the only way to survive, and this felt like the same kind of calculated gamble his father had made when he decided to work in the Titan mines. The next morning, Jake met with Kithara and formally accepted the offer. The alien leader seemed pleased and immediately began making arrangements for their departure. The ship he provided was larger and more advanced than the Horizon Dawn, with living quarters for 50 people and cargo space for all the equipment they would need to start a colony. There is one more thing, Kithara said as they prepared to leave. I am assigning a small group of our warriors to accompany you two Kepler 442c. They will serve as your honor guard and help with the initial colonization efforts. Consider it a gesture of respect from one warrior to another. Jake looked at the 6 Zephyrian soldiers who would be joining them and realized that his life had just become much more complicated. He was no longer just an engineer who fixed broken things. He was about to become the leader of humanity's first interstellar colony, with responsibility for the lives of everyone who chose to follow him. As their ship lifted off from Baldur's Prime, Jake watched the planet shrink away beneath them and thought about what lay ahead. Kepler 442c was waiting for them, an unknown world full of dangers and possibilities. He had walked into an arena alone and somehow walked out owning a planet. Now he had to figure out what to do with it. 2 years later, Jake stood on the observation deck of New Pittsburgh's central hub and watched the morning sun rise over the valley they had transformed from an empty wasteland into a thriving human settlement. The planet Kepler 442c had turned out to be even more challenging than Cathara had warned, but it had also provided opportunities that none of them had expected. The early months had been the hardest part. The planet's atmosphere was breathable but thin. The gravity was 30% higher than Earth normal, and the local wildlife included several species that considered humans to be either prey or territorial threats. Jake had lost count of the number of times they had nearly given up and asked Cathara to evacuate them back to Zephyrian space. But slowly, using the same problem-solving approach that had won him the arena fights, Jake and his team had found ways to work with the planet instead of against it. The high gravity made physical work exhausting, but it also meant that their construction materials were incredibly stable once they were in place. The thin atmosphere required them to build pressurized habitats, but the lower air pressure made it easier to extract oxygen from the local water sources. The dangerous wildlife had actually become one of their greatest assets. Dr. Amy Chun discovered that several species produced compounds that were incredibly valuable for medical research. The territorial hunters that had initially threatened the colonists turned out to be excellent partners once the humans learned to respect their territory and provide them with food sources that didn't require hunting. Jake's title was officially Colonial Administrator, but everyone still called him Chief Engineer Morrison because that's how he approached every problem. When the atmospheric processors needed modification for the planet's unique atmospheric composition, Jake designed the upgrades himself. When they needed to establish mining operations that wouldn't disrupt the local ecosystem, Jake found ways to make the extraction process actually improve the soil chemistry. The Zephyrian honor guard that Cathara had assigned to the colony had initially been a source of tension. The 6 alien warriors were used to military discipline and clear command structures, while the human colonists preferred to make decisions through discussion and consensus. But over time, the two groups had learned to work together in ways that surprised everyone. Commander Vexka, the leader of the Zephyrian Guard, had become Jake's closest advisor on matters involving alien relations. The warrior had a strategic mind that complemented Jake's engineering approach to problems, and together they had developed policies that kept the colony running smoothly while maintaining good relations with both the local wildlife and the broader Zephyrian Empire. The colony's success had attracted attention throughout known space. Ships arrived regularly bringing new colonists from Earth, but also visitors from other alien species who wanted to see the human settlement that had supposedly solved the problem of interstellar colonization. Jake had found himself hosting diplomats, scientists, and trade representatives from dozens of different worlds. Dr. Amy Chun had established the first interspecies research institute in known space, where human and Zephyrian scientists worked together on projects that neither species could have accomplished alone. Her team had made breakthrough discoveries in biotechnology, atmospheric engineering, and something she called Cooperative ecosystem management. That was already being studied by research institutions across the galaxy. Captain Lisa Rodriguez had proven to be as good at colonial administration as she had been at Starship Command. She handled the political aspects of running an interstellar settlement, while Jake focused on the technical challenges. Together, they had created a government structure that borrowed ideas from both human democracy and Zephyrian military organization. Pete. Brady had become the colony's chief technical officer, in charge of maintaining all the systems that kept 5,000 people alive on an alien world. He complained constantly about the workload, but Jake knew he was actually happier than he had ever been on the Horizon Dawn. Pete had always been at his best when he was solving problems that nobody had ever faced before, the most unexpected. Development had been the children. In the past year, several human families had been joined by young Zephyrians, whose parents wanted them to grow up in the multicultural environment of New Pittsburgh. Jake often watched the human and alien children playing together in the colony's recreational areas, and wondered what kind of future they would build when they grew up. The colony had become economically self-sufficient within 18 months, exporting rare minerals and biological compounds to markets throughout Zephyrian space and beyond. Trade agreements with Earth provided them with manufactured goods and new colonists, while partnerships with other alien species gave them access to technologies that neither humans nor Zephyrians possessed. But the most important success was something that couldn't be measured in economic terms. New Pittsburgh had become a symbol of what was possible when different species worked together instead of trying to dominate each other. Jake received regular communications from War Chief Kithara, who had become something between an ally and a friend, updating him on political developments in the Zephyrian Empire and asking for advice on problems that required creative solutions. Jake's personal log entry that evening reflected on how far they had all come since that day, when he had volunteered to fight in the arena. He had been just an engineer who fixed broken things, but it turned out that the galaxy was full of broken things that needed fixing. Political systems that didn't work, economic relationships that benefited no one, and cultural misunderstandings. That led to unnecessary conflicts. A communication alert interrupted his thoughts. The display showed an incoming message from Earth, marked with the seal of the Colonial Administration. Jake opened the message and read it with growing amazement. The success of New Pittsburgh had convinced Earth's government to fund 12 more interstellar colony missions, and they were asking Jake to serve as senior advisor for the entire program. He looked out the window again at the valley where human and Zephyrian engineers were working together to construct the framework for an orbital station that would serve both species' merchant fleets. In the distance, he could see the spaceport where ships from dozens of different worlds arrived every week, bringing new opportunities and new challenges. Jake Morrison had walked into an arena alone as a maintenance engineer and emerged as the founder of humanity's first successful interstellar colony. But more importantly, he had proven that the best way to solve any problem was to understand it completely, respect all the factors involved, and find a solution that made things better for everyone. The next wave of colonists would arrive tomorrow, along with a delegation of alien diplomats who wanted to establish similar cooperative colonies in their own territories. Jake smiled and made a note in his log about needing to expand the colony's guest facilities again. He had started out just trying to keep his friends alive, but somehow he had ended up helping to build a better future for everyone.